The Pelosi Payoff and the dumbest bill in America. This is Mark Fisher with Mark and the Millennials, and we don't have any. We just have Warren Miller. How you doing, Warren?
Boomers rule.
Boomers rule. It's Mark and the Millennials with just boomers today because of social distancing. Actually, we have two millennials who are at work today. Thankfully, they're working, but they're working very socially acceptably connected or disconnected, if you will, from home. And then, of course, Garrick is taking his finals, I guess, online, I'm assuming. I'm not really sure how that works, at Towson University. So he'll be back next time. So welcome to Warren. And, of course, we also have Christopher Hopkins, our assistant producer, and Adam Couture, our producer. And so this podcast is called the Pelosi Payoff. I'll get it together, I promise. And the dumbest bill in America. And Nancy Pelosi proposes a $3 trillion stimulus. $3 trillion. And she did this, of course, just with the Democrats in the House of Representatives and Congress, excluded the Republicans, knowing full well that when it goes over to the Senate, it's going to be dead on arrival. But it doesn't matter because she's doing this because she's virtue signaling to her entire base. We're going to talk about what's in it, among other things. But we have Nancy being asked some questions on C-SPAN. In particular, hey, did Donald Trump help you? Did you guys work together on this? At least that way it'll have an opportunity to pass. And we have this clip. You have to listen to it to believe it. And here it is.
Is the president part of these discussions, these negotiations?
I don't have any idea what the president does.
He said that the House was on vacation.
But you know what? Don't waste your time or mine on what he says.
Don't waste your time or mine, Warren, on what the president says. Does she not understand that she needs the president of the United States in order to make a bill become law?
Well, she needs a basic civics lesson. The last two funding bills that came through started in the Senate, did not start in the House. So I think I agree with your conclusion that this is going to be DOA, an additional $3 trillion in spending after we've already committed trillions from the last two rounds.
So get this. $1 trillion of the $3 trillion stimulus that Nancy Pelosi is proposing, $1 trillion of it is for blue state bailouts.
Yeah.
Now, there's some money there, of course, for red states as well, but predominantly they've skewed the money to blue states to be able to solve their pension problems and all of their spending problems and basically plug their budgets after years of fiscally irresponsible spending.
Not that long ago, the governors only wanted $500 billion. They didn't want $1 trillion, they wanted $500 billion. And I just recently heard that Andrew Cuomo now thinks that New York needs $65 billion. To stay solvent.
$65 billion just to be able to stay solvent.
Yeah.
And I wonder how much of that actually is going to be used to plug their pension system, which of course, if you know anybody who's from New York, you'll know that if you're a policeman or fireman or government employee in the state of New York, almost invariably when they retire, they don't retire in New York. They take their pension and they go somewhere else that it does not tax pensions and is a lot more kind on, tax policy for people who are retiring, which is, of course, really ridiculous because they don't actually retain anybody that actually has money, which is ridiculous. So get this, in the stimulus bill for Pelosi, $1,200 checks for illegals. Every single person in America who is illegally president would get a $1,200 check. They're going to pay people more for not working. So if you would get a $1,200 check as well, but for each dependent child, you get another $1,200. So you'd actually potentially make more from not working than you would working, in which case there's going to be a question mark in people's head at some point if this bill were to pass to say, why do I want to go back to work?
How do we know who the illegals are?
Yeah.
And it opens an interesting question. For $1,200, Homeland Security can find out who the illegals are.
Yeah,
so
but
are the illegals really going to apply for this $1,200 with the risk of being detained and deported?
That would be quite the gotcha. Well, maybe Nancy Pelosi's plan is to mail them ballots at the same time they get their $1,200 and say, hey, why don't you just send back the ballot, make sure you vote Democrat because we just gave you $1,200, which of course that's what this is always all about.
Yeah.
Right? It's always about vote buying. But I like that. If it costs $1,200 to find out where they are,
might be kind of cheap.
Might be cheap to be able to find them.
Deport a couple million illegals over a $1,200 check.
And get this, there is also a goal to rewrite the federal immigration laws. That's part of the stimulus package, so that instead of dealing with the emergency that COVID has caused, basically rewriting all of immigration laws and basically saying it doesn't matter whether you broke the law, not only going to get a check, but you're also going to become an American citizen. And apparently the word cannabis is mentioned 68 times in the stimulus. Because, we need to save the planet. I wish the millennials are here, because maybe some of the millennials, especially more the libertarian types, are probably like, well, I don't have a problem with that. But
if the government can keep you drunk and stoned all the time, you don't worry too much about what the government's doing.
That's a fact. That is, it's so true. And then apparently $25 billion in this stimulus bill for the post office. For the post office, right? The same post office that is subsidizing Jeff Bezos' Amazon and is delivering many of his packages on a daily basis, including, by the way, now Sundays. Remember when you were growing up? In fact, not that long ago, you would never check the mailbox on Sundays. Now, it's entirely conceivable that your postman is making deliveries for Amazon on Sundays, and we're subsidizing them through our taxes. But now we want to borrow from perhaps China to be able to provide the money to the post office so that they can in turn subsidize Amazon.
Well, they're another, they don't charge the true cost of whatever it is to deliver something. And they're another organization riddled with employee benefits and pensions that are ludicrous by outside standards.
Unsustainable. I have a post office box at one of the post offices. I won't mention which one. And when you go online and you try to renew, if you try to get an initial post office box, it's a relatively easy process. If you try to renew it, it's highly and unnecessarily complicated. And sometimes I found out that it doesn't work. I'm not really sure why. So you still have to end up going to the post office anyway and saying, hey, did you get my renewal? I mean, do you have that in your system? Because they never sent a confirmation via email that it was actually renewed. I'm sorry, this is the worst run program in America. And I know that it has its purpose, of course, but it needs massive reform. Giving $25 billion doesn't make any sense. So the Republicans are not against doing another stimulus bill, but one of their idea of a stimulus is to provide a payroll tax cut. Explain what that is, a payroll tax cut.
I don't know if I can explain what that is. It's
so if you're every paycheck, you have, of course, federal taxes that are taken out, which contribute to Social Security, among other things. And the idea is that instead of doing that for the next year, perhaps we eliminate that for a full year so that people who are working actually keep more of their money. Not just a little bit, but a lot more of their money. That would be huge, by the way, Warren, because then now we see the difference. One side wants you to get back to work and wants you to keep more of what you earn. The other side wants you to stay home and wants to pay you more than what you were making before to not work.
And raise your taxes.
And raise your taxes at the same time. It's the only way they can make it possible. The person who has best summarized what the problem is in America, in my opinion, is Senator John Kennedy. He's from Louisiana. This is like one of my favorite guys out there now who's in the United States Senate, just because of the plain spokenness. We have a clip of Senator John Kennedy talking about why it's so important to work and why it's so bad not to work. And here is the clip.
I think the only way to get us out of this is to we've got to get ourselves out of it. Government shut down the economy, but it's up to the American people, all of us, to get it back going. An old boss of mine used to say, a person without a job is not healthy, he's not happy, and he's not free. And that's true. This is America.
A person without a job is not healthy, is not happy, is not free. I can't think of a better way to sum up where we are in America right now. We have many unhealthy people because they aren't working and they're not happy. And they certainly don't feel free because they're being told they can't leave their homes, or they certainly can't go to work because work is closed. Or if they're self-employed, they can't open their businesses because they might get arrested. I mean, this is ridiculous. We see this in our own state.
All these things we've battled for years, addiction to opioids, that's going to rise again. Alcoholism, drug dependency. All these various things are going to crop up again because people are trapped in their houses.
They're trapped in their houses.
They're not able to get out and be social and do whatever. And there's a smart way to get back to normal. You have to take some minor precautions. But this thought that until we have a vaccine, you can't go back to normalcy, and we don't even know if a vaccine is going to be work or be
don't know how
effective,
long.
and it could be years.
Could be years or
vaccines
ever.
take years.
That's right. I mean, we hear all these promises, right? And that's great. You know, there's a promising potential vaccine. The problem is even if by miracle it were available and we found out that it worked in 3 months or 4 months, it would take quite some time to scale it to the point that everybody could be vaccinated. In fact, it would probably take years to get to that point. I would assume, I'm not really sure, but we're supposed to not work all that time.
Right. And what's more likely to happen is we will, in the short term, come up with far more effective treatment protocols, different drugs that work on the virus, slow it, make it less deadly, whatever. And that'll happen much quicker. So if you mix those treatment protocols with safe social distancing and some common sense, you can get relatively back to normal.
True. No, it makes perfect sense. The interesting thing is here's what I've found. If you are an elected official, there are plenty of people that are trying to play gotcha right now. If you talk about the concept of getting back to work and why it is important to get back to work, like Senator John Kennedy said, you're not healthy, you're not happy, you're not free when you're not working. But if you talk about that, then immediately you have one side, and sometimes it's not necessarily just Democrats, sometimes it's just people that are completely afraid, who say, how dare you tell us we might go back to work? Do you want us to die? Do you want us to, isn't this going to infect my entire family? I live with someone who's 80 years old. Isn't that going to potentially kill them? And what's really interesting is how we've changed so much as a country where we can't make up our own minds about whether or not we want to go back to work based on our own unique circumstances and how we are living. If you do live with your elderly parents or you're taking care of them, then chances are you probably don't want to go back to work. Okay, there's a really good reason, an argument why you shouldn't do that. But if you're living at home with your spouse and you are middle-aged and you have children in your household, you might want to go back to work.
Well, there's another whole side to this. Right now, there are the haves and the have-nots. And the haves are the federal and state and local employees. And the employees of big businesses like Walmart and Costco or whatever, they're all getting paid. Some are getting paid to stay home and work. Some are getting paid to go somewhere and work.
Yep.
They're the ones that have the huge misunderstanding about those that aren't working, that can't get unemployment insurance, that can't get the PPE loans. And they're watching their American dream go up in smoke.
They are.
And they're totally forgetting about something we all learn in school. It's our constitutional freedoms. Mm-hmm. We have things that are guaranteed against our government. So in other words, if we want to assemble, that's a constitutional freedom that nobody can impede. A governor can't take that away from you. The federal government, the police cannot take that away from you. They can try. But as we watched the beauty shop owner in Texas, they tried. And at the end of the day, the judge wanted an apology.
That's right.
Boy, that's
Bow
really
to
going to
the
make up
state.
for whatever the crime was for trying to provide food for your children. I mean, I think that was an incredible example of a lady that wanted to keep making a living. And due to no fault of her own, she's being told, you can't open your business, you can't make money, you can't feed your family.
You know what I find interesting is, great point, Warren. What I find interesting is and everybody out there in podcast land, you've seen this as well. I've seen business people post online, hey, look, it's time to get back to work. I want to open up my business, and I don't want to downplay the people that have died and so forth. I don't want to downplay the fact that this is a potentially deadly virus and so forth. But the fact of the matter is that if I don't open back up, I'm not going to be in business, and I'm not going to require people to come back to work. I'm going to invite them to come back to work, and they can choose to do so or not choose to do so. Well, I've seen a number of posts that are like that on social media, and immediately that individual and those individuals get attacked. And it's just fascinating to watch this, because you say to yourself, if you don't like that message, then you don't have to go back to work. No one's making you go back to work. This guy just said he doesn't want you to come back to work if you don't want to. But these weren't his employees attacking him. His employees were applauding him. These were just people that may, remotely even barely know him, who've decided to weigh in and say, how dare you? You're going to kill people. It's just really a strange time in America. And the Democrats are talking to this fear, in my opinion, by saying, let's pay you to stay home.
They've weaponized it.
Yes, absolutely.
And they're going to pay you more in unemployment insurance than you probably deserve to stay home and not work. So when you do go to reopen, chances are you got these claims against you, your UI rate that you have to pay the state's going to go up, and you're not going to be able to stay in business long because your costs are going to pull you down.
You know what's interesting is I've always been the kind of person that I always prefer to work. I want to work. I don't want to be idle. And I just always have assumed that everybody is like me. And I do think most people are. I really do. I think most Americans are very individualistic. They're rugged. They want to get out there. They want to work. They want to make a living. They want to advance in their careers. But for some reason, the folks who are the loudest now on social media are the fearmongers, who are basically putting stuff on Facebook saying, well, I work at a hospital and you should be here and see what I'm seeing. And it's like, I'm sure you're seeing awful things. I get it. But does the data support everybody sitting home and doing nothing? What do you think?
It looks like in the U.S. and Germany are tied for survival rate. And
meaning that we have the highest survival rate?
Yes.
Based on the number of cases that we know.
Based on the number of cases. So, it's probably a little shy of 1% of our population. And unfortunately, they're the most vulnerable, the oldest, the people we cherish the most.
Which is terrible.
And
a lot of that was from mismanagement, by the way.
Our government has a big part of the blame in that, and not starting from the beginning to protect the nursing homes and the places where the vulnerable people were, and worrying more about building out a capability, which we saw the Comfort leave New York. We saw the Javits Center being built out for a huge number of beds and not being utilized. So as this virus has moved along, so has the mitigation strategy. But at the end of the day, we're hearing as summer comes, there are going to be fewer and fewer cases. And now the big panic's the relapse, what happens in the fall.
Yes, that is the panic.
But what we can't know is, do we have a more effective treatment? Do we have a more effective way of dealing with people? Are we going to be testing temperatures? Are we going to be having this robust testing capability you're talking about? And if we do, that should severely limit the occurrence of that second outbreak, if you will. The other thing we're going to have a wave of people aren't talking about, and there's no way to get the numbers right now, up until this week in Maryland, and I'm sure in a lot of other states too, you can have elective surgeries. So there are a wide range of things people need to be tested. If they have cancer, they need to be tested to track the cancer. If they have many other diseases, they have to be tested.
Colonoscopies.
Some things, they have issues with their eyes, other parts of their body that need rigorous evaluation.
Knee replacements. I mean, all kinds of.
And we've just shut that off for 2.5, 3 months. And told people you can't do this stuff that's necessary. Now, it's one thing if you're scared you're going to catch the virus by going to the doctor, you delay it. But it's the other thing where it's something, even though it's elective, it's necessary. And we're going to see a whole cadre of deaths related to the fact that the government has shut down these elective procedures that, in a lot of cases, are life-saving procedures, even though they're elective.
That's nuts. That's an amazing point because when you need elective surgery, oftentimes that surgery that you need makes you sedentary. Like if you need a knee replacement, you don't get up and walk around because it hurts every time you do so. So you try to get up as little as possible. Well, now rather than having that done 3 months ago, you're now stuck. Of course, at home, you're sedentary, which means you're getting, obviously gaining weight, you're getting sicker. And certainly you need, perhaps maybe you have high blood pressure. Who knows what? Who knows what's happening? It makes perfect sense. But that's a conversation that's really fascinating. When you have that conversation with someone on the other side of the aisle who is convinced that that's still okay, that's the price you have to pay, they always try to shame you into saying, well, you're just trying to make a lot of money. You're just trying to get rich because you want people to go back to work. And they completely miss the point of what Senator John Kennedy just said. This is fascinating. So next up, President Trump lights up the woke press again. CBS News journalist Weijia Jiang asks Trump why testing is a competition for Donald Trump. So Donald Trump, and it is true, has often said, we have the best testing in the world, and we've done the most tests in the world, and our tests are the most accurate in the world. And that actually is reassuring when you hear a president say that. But journalist Weijia Jiang of CBS News decided to ask Donald Trump why that is important to him. And you really have to listen to her tone to understand what she's saying. And yes, for the podcast listeners, Weijia Jiang is an American citizen who happens to be of Chinese descent. And boy, did the press blow up after this clip. And you have to listen to it. Listen carefully. Here it is.
Said many times that the U.S. is doing far better than any other country when it comes to testing.
Yes.
Why does that matter? Why is this a global competition to you if every day Americans are still losing their lives and we're still seeing more cases every day?
Well, they're losing their lives everywhere in the world. And maybe that's a question you should ask China. Don't ask me, ask China that question, okay? When you ask them that question, you may get a very unusual answer. Yes, behind you, please.
Sir, why are you saying that to me specifically?
I'm telling you, I'm not saying it specifically to anybody. I'm saying it to anybody that would ask a nasty question like that.
That's not a nasty
question. Please go ahead.
Why does it matter?
Okay, anybody else? Please, go ahead in the back, please.
So there you have it. So we wanted you to listen to that entire clip. It was very important because Weijia Jiang of CBS News decided to make herself the news right after she asked the initial question. Why does testing matter is what she asked if people are still dying and we're still adding to the body count in America. Why does that matter? Is it a global competition to you kind of thing? And then the president answers, why don't you ask China that question? In other words, why don't you ask China why all these people are dying? And she, of course, decides to be part of the news then. She decides to make the news. Instead of trying to report the news, she takes off her mask, turns slightly to the cameras so that they can see her, so they can film her, so that the American people can see that she happens to be of Chinese descent and is also an American citizen. And so that the implication being, Mr. President, why did you happen to ask me that question? And in other words, I'm Chinese, you're asking me that question. I'm an American citizen, but I happen to look like I'm Chinese because I am a Chinese American. And President of the United States is going, he's not even addressing that. He's saying, ask the Chinese, you asked me a question, why people are dying, even though we're doing all this testing. And it's because the coronavirus started in Wuhan, China by the Chinese communists. Go ahead, Warren.
Well, the first point, we've talked about this before, China owns the virus. Like you just said. I mean, they're responsible. The reason the president is maybe bragging or certainly boasting about testing is that for every positive test, you could probably stop 1,000 people from getting sick by simply telling that individual to quarantine until the virus is over.
Absolutely.
So, this question by this reporter is moronic in that the testing is what's going to save lives and stop the spread of the virus. So, of course, if you're the president, if you're a governor, and you want to brag about getting test kits from South Korea, and you're using those test kits, that's something you're going to brag about. But at the end of the day, it's not so much about the bragging, it's about stopping the spread of the virus.
Yes, it is.
And if she can't understand that, she wants to turn it into some racial attack, that's on her. It's not on the president.
Well said.
And why he would even recognize her first after the first go around with her.
Well, it's because she stood up and she tried, after she asked her initial question, when he said, go ask China. That's a question for China. In other words, the question for China is what he was framing is, why are so many people still dying in America, in spite of the fact that we're doing all these tests? And Mr. President, you're saying we're doing all these tests, and that is like not helping. People are still dying. It's like, because the virus is deadly, okay? It's deadly, especially to a certain cohort in the United States and elsewhere across the world. And so, but again, she wanted to be part of the news, and she wanted to reveal herself by taking off her mask, which she wasn't supposed to do, by the way, and became the news instead of reporting the news by saying, look at me, everybody. I happen to be Chinese American, and he was attacking me personally. It's not about you, Weijia Jiang. It never was about you, okay? It's about the Chinese government in China, which literally is committing murder, global murder right now, just like communists and socialists always do.
Which they were doing before this epidemic, by the way. If people don't know it, Chinese has a mass euthanasia policy. And if you're a couple, you get married and you want to have a child, and you don't want the girl, you don't keep the girl, they're gonna give you the chance to select the sex of the baby on the first go around. But you're not allowed to have a second child, period.
Yeah, that was the one-child policy, which was in place for many years, and of course, when you have 1.35 to 1.4 billion people approximately, you're communist China. Instead of using education as a way of getting people to do more family discussions about how many children they want, no, in China, of course, they just kill the kid. They kill the kids. But Brett, you're right. Communism kills.
They don't care about life.
Socialism and go ahead.
That's the whole thing about this virus. They didn't care. And they didn't get to the point that they got the WHO to lie for them to cover up about the virus. That's how wicked this country is, this leadership is. They don't care about taking human life. And there's no culpability. They're not apologizing to anybody. They've killed hundreds of thousands of people worldwide because of their carelessness. And they're wanting to cover this up instead of effectively dealing with it like they should have.
And it's interesting because you were mentioning not just the communists and so forth, but also the idea of testing. Because the media, as everybody knows out there in podcast land, initially it was, why don't we have enough ventilators? New York needs 40,000 ventilators a la Cuomo. And why don't you send them all to New York? And which, of course, would have been stupid. And then the next question was, well, hydroxychloroquine doesn't work. In fact, it can never work. It's not possible for it to work. Why are you promoting it? And then they even went as far as the press did to say that Trump had an investment somewhere in hydroxychloroquine, which was, of course, 100% fake news. And now the latest is, why does testing matter? I mean, all you talk about, Mr. President, is testing. If testing was so great, then why do you have staff members who are still getting coronavirus? Because they're being tested, you idiot. That's why we're testing. I mean, it's fascinating how stupid the press is, but more importantly, it's how stupid they think we the people are, which really blows me away. So get this. So here's CNN's Wolf Blitzer asking Brian Stelter, excuse me. So Wolf Blitzer asking Brian Stelter about his reaction to the president's comments to Wei Zhejiang. So Wei Zhejiang's the one that asked that question and said, oh, you're attacking me personally. And then CNN Wolf Blitzer discusses this for like at least an hour or 2 hours on air on CNN. And here's Brian Stelter, and he's got his reaction on CNN. Here it is.
Well, clearly the president was rattled enough to walk off because he didn't want to hear the questions from Caitlin Collins and Wei Zhejiang. And I think what we saw in that exchange with Wei Zhejiang is something that has racial overtones. It is racist to look at an Asian American White House correspondent and say, ask China. This isn't happening in a vacuum. This is part of a pattern of behavior from the president that goes back many years. So he doesn't have the benefit of the doubt that someone might have if, for the first time ever in their life, they made a comment like that to a reporter. But the president has been rattled by Wei Zhejiang's questions in the past. He has treated her and other female reporters differently in the past. And he's also had this pattern of reacting to minority journalists in a very specific and different way, Wolf.
Yeah, so there you go. So I just want everybody out there to know, if you looked really closely, if you had an opportunity to watch this podcast versus listen to it, when you watch the clip that we just showed you, in addition to listening to it, on the Chiron, it says of CNN, it says, Trump asks Asian American reporter to ask China about the coronavirus deaths. So it doesn't say Trump says ask China about it should say Trump asked reporter to ask China why there are so many people that have died as a result of China's mismanagement and, of course, negligence and fraud in this particular entire pandemic. No, it doesn't say that. It says Trump asks Asian American reporter. So there you go. There's CNN trying to make the news and trying to race bait and trying to divide people instead of really talking about the issue, which is it started in China. Ask the Chinese why it's so deadly. Warren.
It's more of the same. It's more rock throwing. You have to question. It's not objective media. It's not something that anybody that had a sense of ethics or propriety that went to journalism school would understand to be within the confines of what you do in journalism, which is report the news. This is, weaponizing the news against an individual. And a lot of these people that are so-called journalists really aren't. They don't have journalistic integrity. They don't have the best interest of the people they're communicating the news to. I mean, it stopped a long time ago. But
really has.
Luckily, Americans are smart enough not to watch MSNBC and CNN and the numbers that they're watching other news sources. And I think it in a way it causes, luckily, the very networks that are pushing this stuff a lot of harm.
Hopefully. I mean, we can only hope, because CNN obviously is, by the way, CNN, as you know, you see it in all the airports, which drives me crazy, because when you watch CNN report on these press conferences, I always say to myself, was I watching the same press conference? Did I watch the same response the president gave? Am I saying the president's perfect, by the way? No. Am I saying the president is Mr. Perfect when it comes to articulating what he's trying to get across? No, of course not. But he's obviously really ticked off, the president is, at China. Rightfully so, and so should we. So here's CNN's Caitlin Collins. By the way, Caitlin Collins was right next to Wei Zhejiang during that press conference. And Caitlin Collins was trying to ask a question and then gave way to Wei Zhejiang when Wei Zhejiang tried to make the story about her being an Asian American. And the president was, of course, attacking her, which, of course, he was not. But here's Caitlin Collins on CNN talking about the President of the United States during that particular press conference. Listen to her spin on this. Here it is.
Himself is taking. And of course, Wolf, the other thing you noticed that was different in that press conference today out in the Rose Garden than what we've seen in any others is that the staffers are wearing masks, the ones you saw standing alongside the colonnade, even the Health and Human Services Secretary, Jared Kushner, another official that they've hired to come and help with testing. The guests were wearing masks, but the president himself was not wearing a mask. And we know previously when the CDC issued that guidance at the beginning of April, saying they believe people should cover their face when in public and they couldn't socially distance from others, that the president said he was not going to follow that. So the question is he also not going to follow this new requirement that staffers entering the West Wing should all be wearing masks? So a lot of questions to the president, Wolf, but he did not take any from CNN there at the end.
Yes. So the question that she has, Caitlin Collins, is the president wasn't wearing a mask during the press conference. But not that Wei Zhejiang took her mask off to reveal the fact that she was Asian American to all of America when she tried to make herself the story, asking the president the question when he says, ask China about why there's so many deaths in the United States. But of course, Wei Zhejiang made it about herself and then took off her mask. Who cares whether the president wears a mask or not? We call this in America personal responsibility. You don't really have to wear a mask as far as I'm concerned if you don't want to, but I would highly recommend that you do so if you're elderly. If I would highly recommend that you do so if you are in any way impaired, your health is impaired in any way, you have any kind of frailty whatsoever, of course that's what you should do. In fact, maybe you shouldn't even go out at all. But the fact, I don't know, that's up to you. But he's not wearing a mask, and that's what you're reporting?
So the first thing we know is the president's being tested almost daily. So he knows he doesn't have coronavirus.
Yes.
That's number one.
If not twice daily, probably.
The second thing is, when this guidance came out, the health professionals all told us that you've got to wear an N95 mask or better to protect yourself from getting sick. And there's still this respiratory element, but the bigger part of getting sick is touching something that's been in contact with COVID and then touching your face in some way. It gets into your nose and then it gets into your lungs and then you get infected, right?
Yes. Yes.
So number one, wearing what 90% of Americans are wearing as masks is not going to keep you from catching COVID. It's not. And this is what the health professionals have told us. It will, however, help you if you have COVID from transmitting it by sneezing or by coughing. It will catch a lot of those droplets.
It'll mitigate it, but it's not going to eliminate it.
But it'll severely reduce the effectiveness of you transmitting it.
Sure.
So the whole mask concept is about transmission. It's not about catching the virus.
Right.
And that's an important distinction that people have to
Unless
understand.
you're lucky enough to have an N95 mask.
Right. Well, even then...
And who the heck has that unless you work in a hospital?
Some of those masks are not effective because my understanding is that means that 95% of the particulate matter that you would breathe is filtered out. But COVID is in that 5% range where you can still breathe it.
Of course.
With a mask.
Yes.
So
yeah. And it can also go in your eyes, right? It can enter all
all ways it can be.
So you would need goggles or you'd need a face mask plus a regular mask. I mean, it's ridiculous that CNN has decided to say, well, the president wasn't wearing a mask. Look, I don't know about you guys out there in podcast land, but when my president or any president of the United States, doesn't matter who it is, Barack Obama, if he were living through this, Donald Trump, Bush, Clinton, whomever, I want to see what they're saying. I want to see their lips. I want to see their mouth. I want to see their facial expressions. I don't want them wearing a mask.
Well, the other madness is the mask recommendation is for indoors. He was outdoors in the Rose Garden. He was not indoors, number one.
And they were social distancing.
And number two, they were doing the 6 feet of social distancing. They were doing everything that they could do to make it okay. And he's probably more than 6 feet from anybody.
No doubt in my mind.
So this lunacy about masks has gone beyond belief. If you're in a crowded Walmart or Home Depot, probably should be wearing a mask.
I would agree with you.
But if you're outdoors in a park and people are 50 feet away from you, there's really not much of a need to be wearing a mask. It'd probably be a better idea to wear gloves.
Absolutely.
Because the gloves are going to protect you from anything you touch.
That's what my wife keeps saying too. She's like, if I go into a Home Depot or a Lowe's, her big thing is she wants to wear gloves.
Yeah.
And it actually does make sense because you can't reasonably wash your hands every 10 seconds when you're touching something at a Home Depot or when you hit into something or here's my other thing is when you're pushing a cart, right? Because I don't care, even though they have, not all stores have this by the way, but some stores have someone there spraying the cart. And I'm just like, well, my understanding is COVID can still live for a little while even after you spray it.
Right.
So what good is it? It helps a little bit.
Buddy was telling me he went to a supermarket a couple weeks ago and he wanted some prepackaged lunch meat. And there's an older gentleman in front of him grabbing all the packages of lunch meat. No gloves. And looking through them at different things. And does this for a good 5 minutes while he's waiting. He decided to walk away. He was disgusted.
Of course.
But obviously, if this guy's sick, he's now infecting every package of lunch meat in the market. Didn't buy anything. Just handled all of it.
Ugh.
I mean, this is what you have to worry about when you go to the store.
And by the way, even pre-COVID, there were people that did that. And you always knew then, why are they touching all the food? Because at some point, someone's going to touch that as well and consume it. And then who knows what. So incredible. So way to go, media. You messed up again, naturally. Just as crooked and fake as ever. So next up, Pennsylvania Secretary of Health, Rachel Levine. Pennsylvania Secretary of Health, Rachel Levine, moved her mother, who's 95 years old, out of a senior facility and into a hotel. Meanwhile, people, of course, in those same nursing homes were dying. But this Secretary of Health decided that her mother was special, which I'm sure she was special to her, and her mother apparently is fine, this 95-year-old mother. But the Secretary of Health did this and, of course, didn't tell anyone. Because if she did, then everybody in Pennsylvania would have done the same thing. They said, oh, thank you very much, Secretary of Health. Since you're telling us by your actions that you're moving your own mother out of a nursing home, we probably should do the same thing. But people didn't do that. So as a result, of course, you have all these people that have died all throughout the Mid-Atlantic and Northeast in nursing homes unnecessarily. Well, here's what makes this interesting. Is the Secretary of Health of Pennsylvania, Rachel Levine, is a transgender. Her actual name was Richard, I believe, but she changed it to Rachel, not to confuse anybody. And she was really treated with, like kid gloves because of the fact that she's a transgender. So you really can't attack her for doing something because she's special, she's woke. We have a clip on her explaining away, him, I'm not sure, explaining away why her 95-year-old mother was taken out of the nursing home and put somewhere else, and she parses the words. Just ridiculous. We're going to talk about this afterwards. Here's the clip.
Secretary, we're hearing that you moved your mother from a nursing home to a hotel. What message does that send to the thousands of Pennsylvanians whose parents are in nursing homes but may be unable to move them out when the person in charge is overseeing nursing homes and is in charge of the state's response to coronavirus moves out their own parent?
Well, thank you for that question. My mother actually is a resident of a personal care home, not a nursing home, and that is regulated by the Department of Human Services, not the Department of Health. My mother requested, and my sister and I, as her children, complied to move her to another location during the COVID-19 outbreak. My mother is 95 years old. She is very intelligent and more than competent to make her own decisions. I remain committed to protecting residents in Pennsylvania, wherever they live and wherever they go. Whether it is in a facility that I regulate, whether it is in their homes and their communities, and whether or not they agree with our strategy.
So that's Rachel Levine, Dr. Rachel Levine, Secretary of Health of Pennsylvania, talking about and basically reading a statement. So the press the story was planted with the press. A member of the press, a reporter, read her question, which was planted, and then Dr. Levine knew the story had been planted and had already written a response, which is a BS response, right? Because she says, well, someone else regulates those. I don't regulate those. Has nothing to do with who regulates it. You're the state's top health officer. You took an action to remove your mother from a deadly situation, but didn't care to tell everybody else. Warren.
Well, the first thing, I'm not sure about Pennsylvania, but I know in Maryland, most hotels are closed. So was there some type of favoritism to open a hotel room for a mother? Because as far as I know, hotels are not essential and they're not open. So that's the first question. And beyond that, whether it was leaked to her or not, it's kind of ridiculous that you're putting your own family member above anybody else in Pennsylvania that have a concern about the care of their loved ones.
Yeah, you're the Secretary of Health. You're supposed to treat everybody equally and give everybody the same information that you have. Obviously, she had information that she did not share and acted on that information. I don't see the difference between that and trading in the stock market when you knew that COVID was coming and there was a pandemic, and then basically selling off your entire portfolio because you had insider information.
Yep.
There's no difference with this whatsoever. Other than the fact that, of course, the press in Pennsylvania, which is very woke also, they're treating her very carefully and gently because it's really a man who's dressed up as a woman and is a transgender. And I'm sorry, it's still biologically a man. I wish the millennials were here. I mean, obviously our assistant producer, Christopher Hopkins, is a millennial, but the millennials would probably, because millennials are a lot more sensitive about this issue, which I think is interesting because they were raised a certain way. It's hard for me to look at a health officer who is a transgender, and this is just me speaking now, and take the individual in a way that says, why are you in this position in a way that makes you really, I don't know. I just feel like, I don't know. What am I missing here? Help me out. What am I trying to say here, Warren?
Well,
without getting myself in trouble, by the way, in podcast land.
Obviously, you have somebody that is outside of the norm.
Yes.
And I'll go back to my former point. She thinks she's special for some reason. You can tell from the way she talks to the media about it. She's woke or whatever. And she has all the right answers. The problem is it's a double standard that she's presenting.
Everybody's afraid of touching this issue because of the fact that she's a transgender.
Well, it's not just that. It's this issue about her mom.
Yes.
And so because she's, I don't know, a transgender or she or whatever, she's smarter than the populace of Pennsylvania. And like you said, she has inside information, and she's just not looking out for the best interest of the people that her job requires her to.
She's not. And by the way, Chris Hopkins, our assistant producer, is going to put a picture up. He's going to put a picture up of Dr. Levine so you can see what she looks like and understand kind of why we think this is funny. I'm sorry, I think this is funny. I don't think it's funny that people are dying in nursing homes, obviously, and we don't think it's funny that Dr. Levine is trading on this information, but nonetheless, it's funny the fact that here's the state's top health officer. The only thing that would make that more funny is if it was the top mental health officer, in which case I think we'd all say, okay, way to go, Pennsylvania. So next up, Donald Trump coins the term Obamagate to the media. He coins the term. Finally, we've heard this word once or twice before over the past 3 years, but then everybody quickly kind of disposed of the word because they thought to themselves, nah, we really shouldn't go there because there's no way that all of this information went all the way up to Barack Obama. There's no way he was directing it. We actually still don't know that that's the case because lots of documents are being brought forth and lots of information is being uncovered on a daily basis now. Nonetheless, there's enough information to certainly lead us into the direction that his inner circle knew a lot about what was going on and were actively participating in entrapping General Flynn. So we have a clip on this where the media asks Donald Trump a question. And here is the clip. Here it is.
Mr. President, in one of your Mother's Day tweets, you appear to accuse President Obama of the biggest political crime in American history by far. Those were your words. What crime exactly are you accusing President Obama of committing, and do you believe the Justice Department should prosecute him?
Obamagate It's been going on for a long time. It's been going on from before I even got elected. And it's a disgrace that it happened. And if you look at what's gone on, and if you look at now all of this information that's being released, and from what I understand, that's only the beginning. Some terrible things happened, and it should never be allowed to happen in our country again. And you'll be seeing what's going on over the coming weeks. But I wish you'd write honestly about it. But unfortunately, you choose not to do so. Yeah, John, please.
What is the crime exactly that you're accusing him of?
You know what the crime is. The crime is very obvious to everybody. All you have to do is read the newspapers, except yours.
Isn't that amazing? So for 3 years, this very reporter, having been part of the Washington Press Corps, has to ask a question. Well, what is the crime? I mean, don't you have an intellectual curiosity and a fiduciary duty, or a duty at the very least as a reporter, to basically ask questions to everybody that you know and say, is this a crime? Is it a crime to entrap someone? Is it a crime to unmask and spy on people? Go ahead, Warren. What am I missing here?
You have a former president that's more and more is coming out every day that engineered an attempted coup of a sitting United States president before he became president. It doesn't alleviate any of it. And this week, both the former president, vice president admitted they had knowledge of this. We know there's a guy named John Durham out there that's investigating a lot of this. We know a lot of these documents are about to be declassified. I was just reading about Christopher Steele in England in a court case, bringing forth that he knew the DNC had paid Fusion GPS to create his report, which was totally erroneous, but it was the basis for FISA warrants. It was the basis for surveillance. It was a basis for a lot of things.
Including spying on a campaign.
Yes. Yes. And, the whole thing with Michael Flynn, he didn't commit a crime. They went and they entrapped him. He did not physically commit a crime that he was accused of. And right now, a Clinton-appointed judge is still trying to prosecute him, even though the case has been withdrawn against him.
Right, because he's inviting any interested party to come forward to provide information. What?
Yeah, it should be over. It should be over. The gavel should fall. It should be over. So I think, the Democrats for 3 years have accused Russia of collusion with Trump and all this stuff, and I think the real information is about to hit the wind. And the reality of it is, we have to hope the U.S. Senate can open these investigations, and some of the media will report on this fairly, instead of what CNN and MSNBC will do with this, and the Washington Post and the New York Times, which is totally twist all the content in a way that the Democrats look like they're heroes, and the affected parties look like they did something wrong.
And some of the media will ask the same question as that reporter in that press conference, which is, well, Mr. President, what crime did he commit? It's like, what? I mean, you're a reporter. You don't have enough knowledge to even know what's been happening in the last 3 years, to even understand, to maybe ask a different question, like, Mr. President, do you think it's Obamagate because the President of the United States, namely Barack Obama, had direct knowledge of this entire espionage and coup attempt, and it was being directed by him, or at the very least, James Comey and the other intelligence agencies' heads? But no, he doesn't ask that question. They're not interested. They don't want to know. Of
course not.
100% up. 100% right. So next up, we have the dumbest bill in America. And do we have a lead up? Mr. Assistant Producer, here it is.
Dum 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 dum.
And the dumbest bill in America is the $3 trillion Pelosi Payoff, known as the Heroes Act. What a great name. So virtuous, the Heroes Act, that's what she's calling it. But it's really a $3 trillion payoff to all of her Democrat friends and her contributors and the Democrat Party and folks who are here illegally and anybody else who apparently wants money for staying home. And I'm not saying those folks who, don't necessarily want to stay home to be safe. I'm talking about the Democrat operatives who just want to pay off people to do nothing and then garner their vote, right? So that's the dumbest bill in America. What a surprise. And by the way, you know what else this bill does? The Heroes Act? It's a federal bill to eliminate state voter ID. It eliminates statewide voter ID. Why? What does that have to do with solving the economic crisis that we're in? Nothing. What does that have to do with solving the healthcare crisis that we're in? Nothing, but it's still in the bill nonetheless. Go ahead, Warren, take a shot at this.
When the coup attempt doesn't work, we'll come up with something else.
The new coup.
The only problem Nancy has is she doesn't run the U.S. Senate.
Yeah, it's going to be a real
She
problem.
would like to, but I don't think Mitch McConnell for anything is going to even seriously consider this bill. Number one, the governor's asked for $500 billion. So that's $2.5 trillion in excess over what they asked for. I can't fathom where all that money is going to go. Number two,
where it's going to come from.
We're already trillions of dollars into a recovery.
Yes.
We've already devalued the credit of the United States dramatically. So to go back into that well one more time, I mean, we're now at the level where we're hurting our great-great-great-grandchildren.
Yes, we are.
I mean, we're setting ourselves up for 70, 75 years of recovery to get over this massive amount of spending we've already committed. And this is just wrong on so many levels. And it's the Democrat game. Pay people off before the election. They vote for you.
They vote for you. And here's what's interesting. You said devalue currency, which is basically, right on the money. Excuse the pun. But devalue also means inflation. Right. So what we're going to set off is one of the most massive eras in inflation in American history, where your dollar or all of your savings and investment are going to be halved, if you're lucky, halved, cut in half. So hopefully, if you own something that's real, like real property or something that actually generates income, you can ride that inflationary wave. But if you're a saver, which is actually a good thing, the federal government with these stimulus programs, and certainly with Nancy Pelosi's $3 trillion stimulus program, is literally gutting and destroying your savings and making it worthless. By the way, that includes your Social Security check as well, because it'll be worth half of what it's worth today in just a couple of years. The HEROES Act also would require the counting of absentee ballots in all states up to 10 days after receipt. So even though you receive absentee, miraculously you receive the absentee ballots 10 days after, but you still have to count them. And maybe that's why they want to give the Postal Service $25 billion to make sure that they can postmark them back before the election.
We're waiting to see this happen in California. So there's a special election in California yesterday. A Republican won a Democrat seat. It had gone for Hillary, I think, by 16 points.
But they haven't counted all the absentee ballots yet.
And the Republican is up 17,000 with about 65% of the precincts reported. But there's a practice of voter harvesting.
Yes, there is. Ballot harvesting and voter harvesting.
So the Democrat Party in California is out knocking on doors. Did you get a ballot? If so, you need to fill it out and give it to me.
Yes.
And these are people who have no intention of voting. And this is after the election is pretty much over. And thousands of ballots are going to show up in the next couple of days.
Miraculously, they're going to show up. And the election is over. It's over. It's behind.
It's over. So it really is. I mean, this whole thing about fairness, anybody out there that's ever played a game with their family and believes in the rules, this flies in the face of that. The Democrats want to recreate the rules, and they want to find as many ways as they can
to cheat
and distort a traditional voter system that ensures democracy.
First, pay off the voters with stimulus, and then basically rig the election with absentee ballots, ballot harvesting or voter harvesting, same thing, and then getting rid of voter ID. And then paying off illegal immigrants and saying, now you're going to be a citizen with the stimulus bill, and then you can vote. I mean, it's just disgusting. Here's Nancy Pelosi with a clip of her talking about her HEROES Act, and you'll love what she says. Here it is.
Is the president part of these discussions, these negotiations?
I don't have any idea what the president does.
He said that the House was on vacation.
But you know what? Don't waste your time or mine on what he says.
Dude, Nancy, I don't care if the president, I'm not going to listen to the president anyway. I'm going to put in my own bill and basically virtue signal to all of our folks out there who are our voters. And then we also have CNBC. CNBC is a business channel of NBC News, which you can imagine already is a crooked business channel because it's a left-leaning. Look, I'm sorry. Most business people are by definition right of center. Because they actually pay taxes and they see how much they pay. They employ people. They see how difficult it is to run a business, and now they can't even open up their business because of the coronavirus pandemic. But so, of course, CNBC, business channel, but since it's owned by NBC, it's to the left of center, and actually way left of center. Here's Jim Cramer, one of their idiot talking heads at CNBC, talking about his love affair with the Democrat $3 trillion Pelosi stimulus bill. Here it is.
Another rescue package. It's on the table. This morning, the Democrats in the House of Representatives unveiled a new $3 trillion stimulus bill that they're calling the HEROES Act. While the Republicans in the Senate have already come out in opposition, dismissing it as a Democratic wish list, there's some good stuff in here. Like a badly needed $1 trillion for cash-strapped state and local governments, another round of $1,200 stimulus checks with an extra $1,200 for each of your dependents, more funding for unemployment insurance and the payroll protection program, and $75 billion for coronavirus testing and contact tracing, which you know we need. I think this is a sensible opening bid from the Democrats, given that the economy is still sputtering. And we don't want a public health crisis to turn into a credit crisis. Something Republicans don't want to avoid. They got to avoid it, too. Don't take it from me.
So that's CNBC's idea of reporting about business, pro-business stuff. Oh, it's a great stimulus bill, according to Jim Cramer of CNBC. It gives $1 trillion to blue states to bail them out because of their fiscally responsible spending long before the pandemic.
Okay, we just discussed it. Somehow spending $3 trillion, printing $3 trillion of money is going to prevent a credit crisis?
Right. This is their business guy.
Yeah. I mean, whose credit are we talking about?
Yeah, right. Our grandchildren.
China? I don't get it.
So we have a second clip with Jim Cramer of CNBC, and this part is where he actually interviews Nancy Pelosi, and she's talking about her stimulus bill. Listen to this really closely, because part of the stimulus bill is about contact tracing. In other words, spending a lot of money to determine and hunt people down who they think have coronavirus. And now, of course, here's Nancy talking about the other part of the wish list of the Democrat Party and the stimulus bill, basically controlling the entire business community through OSHA. And here is the clip.
Something happens to them, the best defense that the employer has is that we obeyed the letter and the spirit of the law of the OSHA.
You would be in favor of that plan opening. It was provided that there's oversight.
Well, we have to. One of the provisions of this bill that we haven't been able to get passed in previous bills, but not with strong opposition, it just wasn't a priority for the other side at the time. But we think it's a stronger priority now. We've always been for it. Is that we have a strong OSHA regulation, not guidelines, but mandates as to what should happen in the workplace. That's everybody's best protection, the worker and the employer, should the worker get sick.
Should that plant be open? Must be allowed to open that plant?
Well, I don't know what the conditions are in his plant, but again, what we have to be concerned about is the safety of the worker.
So there she is. She's talking about Elon Musk, of course. Should he be able to open up his plant? And she's like, well, no, OSHA is it's going to be a mandate from OSHA to determine whether you can open when we close you. Essentially, it's government acting like the Gestapo and controlling businesses about when they can open, whether or not they can open. Pretty much what government's doing right now with the business community, except that now she's going to codify it through her HEROES Act. Warren.
I'm just really relieved that OSHA reports to the President of the United States through the Secretary of Labor, and it does not report to Nancy Pelosi.
Thankfully, and the bill's not going to have a chance.
Yeah.
That's the other good thing, too. So final thoughts on Nancy Pelosi's HEROES Act, which is the $3 trillion Pelosi payoff to the woke in America. Thoughts on that, Warren? Final thoughts.
Too expensive. There's no reason somebody that lives in Iowa or Kansas should be held liable for New York pensions or Illinois pensions for
well said. Here.
Ridiculous union bargaining that's gone on over the years that have enriched the union members. I can't fathom the fact that a farmer in Kansas would now have this liability, and that's what Nancy wants.
It is.
She wants the rural areas to fund ridiculous collective bargaining agreements that have been agreed to over the years between Democrats who are supported by the unions and the union bosses who have given the Democrats huge sums of money to get elected and in turn get huge sums of money back to fund their unions.
It's the 2020 Pandemic Hunger Games by Nancy Pelosi. So we always like to end with something funny. Of course, that already is funny because it's the dumbest bill in America. But South Park, of course, talked about SARS years ago during the Obama administration. And SARS, of course, really didn't impact the United States really at all. like they thought it was going to. Clearly, this pandemic has, the COVID-19 pandemic has, there's no doubt about that, so we don't want to play that down, so don't attack us here in podcast land. But here's the thing. This pandemic has shown that we have a very, very low death rate. And as time goes by, we're going to make that death rate go down more and more and more and more, which is great, so that people can go back to work. But South Park, of course, is making fun of SARS, and boy, did they see ahead with this pandemic because of the, I don't know, lots of people basically saying, you can't back to work, go back to work. Nancy Pelosi saying, I have the heroes hack. You can't go back to work. I'm going to pay you to stay at home. You have to hear this clip. It's really funny. Here it is.
It's all right, Dad.
How's your mother?
She's hanging in there. Here, drink some beer.
It's cool on my tongue.
You're gonna be all right.
Stanley, listen to me. I have SARS. There's only a 98% chance that I will live.
No, Dad, no!
Listen, Stan. SARS is destroying our people. The Native Americans put it in the blankets they gave us. Soon there will be only 98% of us left.
What can I do?
You must find a cure for SARS, son, and save our people.
Cure SARS? Oh, Jesus!
So, there's only a 98% chance I'm going to live. And he's like on the deathbed, you know, and I'm not going to make it. So anyway, that's the last word for Mark and the Millennials. Thank you for joining Mark the Millennials. This is Mark Fisher. Thank you to our Millennials who aren't here, but we do have Christopher Hopkins. He is our assistant producer, and he is here. We thank him very much, and he's a Millennial. And we also want to thank Warren Miller. And we're going to see Garrick Ross back soon, and hopefully Squirrel and Andrew Fujiniti. And we also want to thank our producer, Adam Coutura. Check us out on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and our website. See you next time.